On consumer behavior. We are in the 8th session of unit number 5th and cumulative we are at the session number 44 today. Dear student, this session is divided into 3 parts today and we are going to understand 3 important concepts and its relevance to consumer behavior. The session is divided into the first part wherein we are going to understand about consumer perception. We are going to start by understanding what is the definition of consumer perception. Is there a difference between perception and sensation? What is that? We will try to look into. Similarly, we will try to understand what is nature of perception and the process of that is perception. So we will look into 4 important aspects starting from introduction or definition, difference, nature, and finally the process of perception. Without wasting time, let us move into and try to understand what is perception in general. What do you mean by consumer perception? If you look into the term perception, it can be defined or is defined generally as ability to derive meaning. Derived from the word perceive, it refers to the ability of giving meaning to whatsoever is sensed by our sense organs. It is this process, dear students, by which a consumer or an individual interprets one's sensory impression to give a meaning to them. Whatever is inferred by the sensory organs, he tries to convert them in such a way that you conclude it in the form of giving a meaning. So if you look at the definition, theoretical definition of consumer perception is, it is a process wherein individual undergoes 3 important things. He tries to select the stimuli, organizes the stimuli, and interprets the stimuli into a meaningful and coherent picture of this world, which makes us to understand that consumer perception with the process is related to a stimuli. 3 things which can happen with the stimuli you are exposed to, that is selection, organizing, and interpretation of stimuli, and this interpretation is converted into something which is meaningful, which is a coherent picture of the world, is what has been carried out by a process which is called as consumer perception. But generally, most of the people try to correlate and use the word interchangeably with respect to perception and sensation. Let us try to understand in the next slide what is the difference between perception and sensation. If you look at, dear students, when I started talking about what is the difference between the two, if you look at the first thing, sensation, if you look at, is an ability of our 5 senses, 5 organs to sense a stimuli. What does it mean? What are our sense organs? Sense organs are eyes, ear, nose, tongue, and skin. Now this is trying to have an understanding of a stimulus. What does it mean? It means sensation is an auto-reflex mechanism. What does it mean by auto-reflex mechanism? Means that is direct and immediate of our sense organs. Now this stimulus could be anything, a person, object, situation, or a thing. And more precisely, in marketing, it could be a product, could be a brand, could be an advertisement, or even a store. That means sensation is a reaction or a response of a sense organ or a sensory receptors towards a stimuli. I will look at a brand. My eyes will catch that particular brand. So my sense organ which have come into the picture is eyes, and it has catched off the brand name or catched off the packing. That is what I mean to say in terms of sensation. So the question arises with respect to what is perception. Perception is in much broader in scope. It is a complex process, like it was a auto reflex. Sensation was an auto reflex mechanism. But perception is a complex process by which a person organizes the facts around the stimuli and gives meaning to it. This means perception process depicts a complex and dynamic interplay of three processes. What are those three processes? Selection, organization, and interpretation. The person selects a stimuli in case of perception and interprets the input which is received from the sense organ so as to give a meaning to a stimuli. Let us try to understand that in a very simple way. A person sees a new package of goodnight vaporizer at an outlet. What happens when he sees a new packaging? He picks up another stimuli on the package through his senses, as well as organizes the facts which are in the internal memory, external sources, so as to conclude that the package which he is looking at is the new, but the brand is old and familiar. ही जी process पूर्ण झाली, that is called as perception. There was a change in package. You saw it. The sense organ activated was the eyes. After seeing it, it goes to your memory, verifies, you collect the data from the shopkeeper, from the retailer, and concludes that yes, the packing have changed, but the brand is the same and is familiar. This entire process is called as perception. While the sense organs have reported a change in the colors of a packaging, the human mind will start working cognitively and organizes information around to get a conclusion. It will try to, sensation part is only to watch. Perception is, it will try to collect the information around and it is trying to arrive at a conclusion. So this is what is the basic difference again between a perception and between a sensation. In other words, I will put it in a very simple word. What is the simple thing I can tell? I can tell that in a very simple way that the perception is broader and includes both physiological component and the sociological and psychological component. But sensation काय involve करतं? Sensation will involve only physiological component. That is what we need to understand as a difference. Similarly, it is always remember that whenever perception process is thought about, it is going to start with the sensation, and when it is going to end up, a meaning is given to a stimuli. ठीक है, stimuli तुम्ही brand बघितलं, that was a stimuli. Eyes was your sensory organ. पण conclusion करण्यासाठी cognitive processes will come into picture. They will try to add, delete, modify the information, and this information will help you to interpret it. आणि एक लक्षात ठेवा, प्रत्येकाचं इंटरप्रिटेशन वेगळं वेगळं असू शकतं, पण सेन्सिंग सगळ्यांचं सारखं. I put in a very simple word, why each of us would be similar in sensing a stimulus, the way we interpret it would be different. In other words, sensation is similar, but perception is not. This is because as far as our sense organs are concerned, we all are similar. But when it comes to a human mind, we all are different. Senses are similar, human mind is different. So we are having, because human mind is different, reason is each and every individual has varying capacities and capabilities. Our backgrounds are diverse. Physiological process, sociological factors like culture, subculture, social class, हे वेगळं आहे. So while sensation is an objective process, perception is going to be highly subjective. That is what we need to look into. Similarly, we need to understand that what is going to be similar, sensations against the similar पण perception नाही. And perception ची process altogether different आहे. Like what I'm going to see by my eyes. मी जर एक advertisement banner बघतोय, मी काय बघितली, तुम्ही काय बघितली, you are going to get the same objects being seen on the banner. But the interpretation would be different in terms of information gathering, modifying the information, and coming to conclusion will differ from both of us. That is what we need to understand. Means human beings differ with each other in respect to perception, similar in terms of sensing a stimulus. That is what we need to understand. It gives us a broader sense to understand, yes, there is a difference between perception and sensation. But perception ची process start कशापासून होती ती sensation पासूनच होती. But the difference is sensation is similar, perception is going to be different. That is what we need to understand. With this, we move a step forward and try to understand what is the nature of perception. There are 4 points which we need to look into. The perception process can be very clearly understood if we look into the nature of perception. So the first word it is written here, nature is a complex process. What does it mean? After a stimulus is detected, मी तो banner बघितला, मी ती packing बघितली, the perception process comes into play. आधी sensation process and then perception comes into play. मग perception जेव्हा play मध्ये येतो, perception is a combination of 3 processes. What is that? The first process is selection, second process is organization, and third process is interpretation. Sensing would be same, but perception would have three steps to be followed related to selection, organization, and interpretation. That means perception is a dynamic process. Let's look at the second nature of perception. Why I said perception is an intellectual process? Because we have concluded that a lot of cognitive effort is required in case of perception. Once sensation takes place, the perception process will involve selection, organization, and interpretation of data. Similarly, perception is broad in nature. Why? Because it will involve all the components. You are going to get physiological component involved. It is because of sensation, and apart from sensation, you are going to have sociological and psychological component also involved. That means broader because it is going to cover philosophical, that is, it is going to cover physiological, going to cover sociological, and going to cover psychological component. Hence, perception is broad in nature. Next nature comes to perception is a subjective process, because there may be a chance that two people may perceive the same stimuli differently. When two persons are exposed to a same stimuli, the manner in which they are going to select, in which they are going to organize, and in which they are going to interpret it would be different. Why it could be different for these two people? Because these two people have been impacted by the background, learning experiences, motivation, and personality, and which would be different from each other. Hence, it is going to be a subjective process, because the stimuli which is same for two persons, their interpretation would be absolutely different. That is what we need to look at. So, to conclude, perception is a complex process. because of the three important things of selection, organization, and interpretation. It is an intellectual process because it involves cognitive effort. It is broad in nature because it is going to involve physiological, sociological, and psychological components. And moreover, it is a subjective process because two people perceive the same stimuli in a different way. The reason for perceiving the stimuli differently is their background, their learning and experiences, their motivation, their personality, many things come into picture because of which they would be different from each other. Hence, perception is subjective in process. Let us try to understand again an important part of perception that is related to the perception process. If you look at the perceptual process which is given on the screen, it has four components. Component number one is input, second is perceptual mechanism, त्याच्यामध्ये तीन substeps होतात, selection, organization, interpretation. Then you have a third part which is output, and the fourth part which is behavior. That is what we need to understand. Let us try to understand one by one all the steps, all the components of the perceptual process. As I said, when is the perception process going to start? The answer would be, it is going to start when a person is exposed to a stimulus. And the sensory receptors, all five sensory receptors, either or all receptors report the same to the human body. While the senses may be exposed to various stimuli, the human senses selects only some of these parts. Like when I roam around, I may see n number of advertisements, but I will look at only certain advertisements. This means that my senses are going to select only some of the points at a time. The reason is very simple. कारण की त्या सेन्स ऑर्गन्सची लिमिटेड कॅपॅसिटी असते त्या पर्टिक्युलर टाइमसाठी. आफ्टर द सेन्सेस ऑर्गन्स रिपोर्ट ऑफ स्टिम्युलाई, द परसेप्शन प्रोसेस टेक्स ओव्हर. जे काही स्टिम्युलाई आलेलं आहे आणि सेन्सेसने ऍक्टिव्हेट झाल्याने काय होतं, द स्टिम्युलाई व्हॉट इज गोइंग टू हॅपन, इट इज गोइंग टू few are selected, organized and interpreted, and this process is called as perception. Now actually, during the process of selection, organization and interpretation, the human being is assisted by a memory bank, or the information that is stored in his long-term memory. This information which is stored in his long-term memory, or the information which is available in the memory bank, is called as schema. This schema act as a filtering mechanism and helps select some of the stimuli, interpret and organize the stimuli. The selection, organization and interpretation of the human mind is done by the characteristics of the perceiver and the characteristics of the situation. मग तुम्ही म्हणाल, what are the characteristics of perceiver? Learning, experience, knowledge, belief. These are characteristics. That is what we need to understand. And characteristics of a situation would include time and location. So let us try to understand that how this four process comes into picture. Four components come into picture. The first one is input. What happens in this input? Input to a perceptual process is the stimuli that surround an individual and exist in the environment. म्हणजे stimuli काही असू शकतं. पर्सन असू शकतं, ऑब्जेक्ट असू शकतं, वस्तू असू शकतं किंवा परिस्थिती असू शकते. When will the perception process start? The perceptual process begins when the sensory receptor detects stimulus in the environment. आणि हा जो स्टिम्युलस जो सेन्सरी रिसेप्टर डिटेक्ट करतोय, that is going to be an input to the perceptual mechanism. Let us try to understand then This input, which is in the form of stimuli, is going to be an input for perceptual mechanism. म्हणजे input काय झाला? Input was stimuli. Stimuli is making everything start in the background to start. Stimuli हा input होतो to perceptual mechanism. आता perceptual mechanism जर आपण बघितलं तर perceptual mechanism consists of three sub processes. What is those sub processes? Perceptual selection, perceptual organization, and perceptual interpretation. Once the sense organ detects the stimuli, एकदा डिटेक्ट झालं की तो व्यक्ती त्याला सिलेक्ट करतो, ऑर्गनाइज करतो आणि इंटरप्रिटेट करतो थ्रू परसेप्च्युअल सेलेक्टिव्हिटी, perceptual organization, and perceptual interpretation. All of these three, that is perceptual selectivity, organization, and perceptual interpretation, are categorized as perceptual mechanisms or are called as perceptual mechanisms. मग होतं काय? If you look at perceptual selection, it refers to a tendency within a person to select one or few out of many stimuli in the environment. But out of many stimuli, only very few stimuli are selected. This selectivity कशाच्या based असते? That selectivity is on the basis of demographic factors, can be socio-cultural factors, and can be psychographic factors. पण डेफिनेटली हे फॅक्टर्स सगळ्या स्टिम्युलायला ऍक्टिव्हेट करण्यापेक्षा ते एकदम सिलेक्टिव्ह असतात आणि सिलेक्टिव्ह स्टिम्युलायवर ते आयडेंटिफाय केलं जातं आणि या टेंडन्सीला आपण काय म्हणतो? परसेप्च्युअल सेलेक्टिव्हिटी. सेलेक्टिव्हिटी could be there could be 100 points available. I selected 3. What are the reasons to select it and what are those 3 is the process by which I will understand perceptual selection. Similarly, there is second perception organization which will come into picture after selectivity. What is perceptual organization? It is the process of organizing various cues so that through this various stimuli and cues a whole picture is created. Means there are various stimuli, they are going to get organized and will be given a form. It is a process of organizing an input or stimuli into a definite, coherent and interpreted structure. पहिलं जे आहे आपल्याकडे स्टिम्युलाई जे इनपुट गेलं, इनपुटचं प्रोसेसिंग झाल्यानंतर ऑर्गनायझेशन स्टेज मध्ये ज्या काही स्टिम्युलाईज मध्ये आपण काम करतोय ते स्टिम्युलाई एक पिक्चरच्या फॉर्म मध्ये, एक स्ट्रक्चरच्या फॉर्म मध्ये तयार होतात. ही सगळी प्रोसेस जी केली जाते ती ऑर्गनायझेशन मध्ये केली जाते. म्हणजे इथं तुम्हाला एक स्ट्रक्चर मिळू शकतो which can be interpreted, which is to be carried out in a perceptual organization. Similarly, in the perceptual mechanism, there is a third process called as perceptual interpretation. What is this interpretation? Interpretation is the process of drawing inferences out of organized whole and giving meaning to it. म्हणजे आपण इंटरप्रिटेशन म्हणजे काय करतो? आपण इन्फरन्सेस काढायचा प्रयत्न करतो. Once the input is interpreted, it will result in output. म्हणजे याचं end will be an input for an output. When input is interpreted, it will result in an output. The output towards a stimuli assumes various forms, that is emotion, moods, feeling, opinion, attitude, and belief. And the last component of discussion is behavior. The resultant behavior is an outcome of an output. या इमोशनच्या बेसवर, फिलिंगच्या बेसवर person would enact out a behavior. The behavior is a function and will be reflective of emotions, moods, feelings as well as attitude and belief. So these are the four components of a perceptual process categorized into input number one, perceptual mechanism number two, output number three, and behavior number four. That is what we need to understand with respect to a perceptual process. So dear students, I suppose we have tried to understand what is consumer perception, what is the nature of consumer perception. We try to understand that what is the process of consumer perception process structure, what are the components of consumer perception, and also we have tried to understand what is the difference between consumer's perception and consumer sensation. जे generally आपण एकत्र म्हणून वापरलं जातं. So we try to understand that is there a difference between perception and sensation? Answer is there is a difference between consumer perception and sensation. With this point, let us move and try to cover second important aspect which we are going to understand in this session is related to consumer imagery. Imagery. What happens generally is, in case of consumer imagery, let us try to understand. In case of consumer imagery, dear students, consumer काय करतो? Consumer tries to formulate images of the marketing stimuli that he has faced. आणि ज्या काही स्टिम्युलाय तो फेस करतो त्याचा तो इमेज तयार करायचा प्रयत्न करतो. These images are called as consumer imagery. So what I mean to say is the perceived image that gets formed may relate to the marketing mix element. It will relate the product to the marketing mix element. Let us try to understand in a very simple way. If the perceived imagery with respect to price, let us try to understand that. Let us look into that point. आपण काय करू, हे इमेजरी कन्सेप्ट समजण्यासाठी परसिव्ड इमेजरी आणि त्याचं प्राइसचं कन्सेप्ट जर केलं तर काय असेल इमेजरी. The manner in which marketer prices a product and creates an image has an impact on consumer decision making. मग काय करतो, जे प्राइजेस आणि त्याची इमेज, हाय प्राइस, मॉडरेट प्राइस, लो प्राइस. हाय प्राइस, व्हॉट डज इट कॅरीज अन इमेज, प्रीमियम एंड. वॉशिंग पावडर मध्ये सुद्धा हाय एंड महाग प्रोडक्ट आहे, एरियल, सर्फ एक्सेल, टाइड, व्हील अवेलेबल आहे, काही मॉडरेट रेंज ऑफ वॉशिंग पावडर्स अवेलेबल आहे. As a consumer, what is more important to us is we are trying to create an image, and this image is going to have an impact on our decision making. मग ह्या बेच्या बेसवर तो कसं प्राइस करतो की हे जे प्राइजेस आहे, जे काही प्राइस दिलेलं आहे कोणत्याही प्रोडक्टला, that price is fair, that price is unfair, that is highly priced, that is mediumly priced. More precisely, one tries to see that this pricing, the image that has been created by a price, is going to have an influence on purchase intention. Moreover, याचा impact satisfaction वर होतो, dissatisfaction वर होतो. Let us try to understand that. The first, fairness of price. कन्झ्युमर्स, कोणताही कन्झ्युमर, तुम्ही काय मी काय, आपण ज्या वेळेस प्राइस बघतो आणि आपण प्राइस बघितल्यानंतर कॉशियसली असो किंवा सब कॉशियसली असो, वी गिव्ह लॉट ऑफ इम्पॉर्टन्स टू द फेअरनेस ऑफ प्राइस. And when price factor comes into picture, the consumer always compares the price that he pays for an offering to that which is paid by other. दोन brands, एक 10 रुपये, एक 20 रुपये. I will try to understand and make a comparison. Why pay 10 rupees? Why pay 20? Generally, marketers will try to have a differential pricing strategy. Differential pricing strategy वेगळ्या वेगळ्या सेगमेंटला वेगळ्या वेगळ्या प्राइसेस. In case you have different price for senior citizen, top for senior citizen, एवढीच gap. सिनियर सिटीजनला वेगळं रेट आहे, वुमेन्सला वेगळे रेट आहे आणि जनरल पब्लिकला वेगळे रेट. पण जनरली असा विचार केला जातो, कंझ्युमर्स काय विचार करतात, की जर डिफरन्शियल प्राइसिंग स्ट्रॅटेजी झालं तर कंझ्युमर्स परसेप्शन इज that is an unfair practice. Why do you want to differentiate a consumer on the prices when you are manufacturing or the costs which are involved in procuring or manufacturing the product is same? Why do you want to keep different prices for senior citizens, for women, for adults? Like, why do you want to create a different price? And what is going to happen is, हा जो perception होतो ना fairness of price, it will lead to customer contentment and subsequent satisfaction. आणि ह्याच्यात कुठेही कंझ्युमरला अनफेअर काही वाटलं तर ही विल लीड टू डिसकंटिन्यू ऑफ ब्रँड अँड विल स्विच ओव्हर टू अदर. सो रिमेंबर वेन यू आर ट्राइंग टू गिव्ह फेअरनेस ऑफ प्राइस, जसं होतं ना जनरली, आधी तुम्ही खूप हाय एंडला विकलं ना, अचानक प्राइसेस कमी केलं तर जे हाय एंडचे लोक तुमच्याकडनं घेत होते ते असं परसिव्ह करतात, वी आर फूल्ड आउट. So that is what the image which was there in the minds of the consumer, and you drastically brought down the price of the product. Immediately what is going to happen, तो customer असं लिंक करतो, प्राइस कमी केली म्हणजे क्वालिटी मध्ये कॉम्प्रोमाइज केलं, मला तो ब्रँड परचेस करायचा नाही, आय ट्राय टू परचेस another. What is that? That is called as fairness of price. Second important point which we need to consider is reference pricing. What is reference price? A reference price is a base price that a consumer uses to compare against another price. आणि हे रेफरन्स प्राइसेस इंटरनल असू शकतात, एक्सटर्नल असू शकतात. इंटरनल that are internal to the customer, that are stored in his memory and retrieved from the bank whenever required. For example, एक lady goes to grocery shop and tries to purchase a sugar. She purchased sugar at rupees 35 rupees per kg last month. But when she goes to purchase this one, she found that rate of the sugar is 36 rupees. एक रुपया वाढलेला वाटतो तिला. So the immediate reaction is, sugar has become expensive, and what happens is, this is what she has concluded on the internal price reference. ती आता लेडी स्वतः जायची साखर घ्यायला, म्हणून तिच्याकडे तिला मागच्या महिन्याचाही प्राइस माहित होता, या महिन्याचाही प्राइस माहित. या प्राइसला आपण काय म्हणतो, दिस पॉइंट इज कॉल्ड एज इंटरनल रेफरन्स पॉइंट. व्हॉट इज एक्सटर्नल रेफरन्स पॉइंट? म्हणजेच एक्सटर्नल सोर्स that are used by an advertiser who communicates with the customer by mentioning that the product is sold elsewhere at much higher price. दूसरीकडे सगळीकडे महाग आहे, इससे अच्छा और सस्ता कहीं नहीं, बिग बाजार. What is this example? This is an example of external reference price. So let us look into the difference. Yes, there is a difference between internal reference point जो कंझ्युमरच्या मेमरीत होता, एक्सटर्नल रेफरन्स पॉइंट जो ऍडव्हर्टाइज करून मार्केटरने तो पॉइंट क्रिएट करायचा प्रयत्न केलेला आहे. म्हणजे एक्सटर्नली जर एक्सटर्नल रेफरन्स पॉइंट मध्ये जर ऍडव्हर्टाइजमेंट जर कम्युनिकेशनच्या माध्यमातून ते होत असेल तर दॅट मीन्स हिअर communication would be pervasive in nature to influence the consumer that the offer is good buy and that the deal is good one. Similarly, we also need to understand that various kinds of slogan in various formats can be used by the marketer to his or her advantage. Let us try to understand that with the help of example. 20% off at Big Bazaar, sold elsewhere at higher price. असे स्लोगन्स जर बघितले, what does this slogan tend to communicate? हे स्लोगन कस्टमरला व्हॅल्यू कम्युनिकेट करायचा प्रयत्न करतात. काय व्हॅल्यू सांगतात? This could be available at the lowest price. If I am going to purchase at the lowest price, what is going to happen? I am going to get the lowest price and it is going to increase my saving. मग तो काय करतो? तो त्या बिग बाजार मध्ये जातो आणि ते प्रोडक्ट तिथून परचेस करतो. That is what we need to understand when we talk about the slogans which we are going to have. Generally, when we take an example of a discount, Discount also makes make people understand the value. Those consumers who are interested to create or go for savings and value, they are definitely going to move for the simple discount which is offered, which is going to make him attract to go to a particular store and purchase the very specific product which is available at a lower price. Flipkart, 1 billion sale, mega Flipkart sale, Amazon sale. You are immediately trying to find out on that what are the prices at which they are offering. And you are dead sure these prices would not be affordable by any other company, any other outlet. Else you go to Amazon and make a purchase. That is what we need to understand in terms of imagery which is created by that particular advertisement. Next important aspect is of discount levels. Advertisements indicate discount levels. This can be framed variously. For example, various certain advertisements are framed as stating a minimum discount level of 5%. 5 कम से कम 5%. उससे ज़्यादा. What is going to happen? That consumer intentions are less favorable than advertisement that state maximum discount up to 30%. Instead of minimum 5%, if I write maximum discount is 30%, imaginary is I will going to get more benefit in that. Because that specifies the maximum discount level. That is a savings you are going to have. That is what we need to understand when we are going to create an advertisement for a distributor. Let us try to put into a very simple example. Let us say that a soap has a varying level of savings, and that is 5% on brand A, 10% on brand B, and 15% on brand C. The maximum discount level would be the most effective as a store traffic builder, as it could influence the consumer's perception of saving. And the last important point is related to bundle pricing. What is bundle pricing? When a marketer sells two or more products and or service offering in a single pack at a special discounted price is called as bundle pricing. Two or more products as a single pack and moreover at a discounted price is the bundle pricing. So what is going to happen? This bundle pricing is going to have a positive effect on consumers' perception. If consumer feels happy with regards to increased saving, he would be able to get out of buying those products together rather than buying those products individually at a higher price. When they start bundle pricing enhances the value of offering to decrease prices and increase sales. Which makes us understand that if this is imaginary, one more important concept which is our area of interest which we need to study is related to the other part, that is perceived risk. What do you mean by perceived risk? आणि कोणकोणत्या perceived riskच्या type असतात? Let us try to understand that. So before we move into, let us try to understand what is a perceived risk. Okay. We have two important aspects here. First, we have covered first important aspect. If you remember what we have covered what is called as consumer perception. Then we have looked at what is consumer imaginary, and similarly attached to consumer imaginary is perceived risk and the types of risk which the consumer thinks are related to. So let us move forward and look into what is perceived risk and what are the types of perceived risk. That is what we need to look at. That is what we will try to understand. Moving forward, let us try to understand that the concept of perceived risk. If you look at their students, while making any choice, while making any purchase decision, and immediately after the purchase is made, the consumer in certain cases experiences uneasiness and tension. Purchase केल्यानंतर सुद्धा तो फेस करतो तो. He is facing that uneasiness, that tension, even though he has purchased the product. He is facing that. So the purchase process results in the state of anxiety and tension. For what? With respect to negative consequences that could result from product usage. This state is called as perceived risk. Manjesh, what is it? It is a feeling of uncertainty. It is feeling of uncertainty. When will that arise? When he is going to make a purchase, and when he made a purchase, feeling of uncertainty has arrived within an individual when he fails to predict the consequences of product choice, usage and resultant experience. प्रोडक्ट तो खरीद लिया, पर जो चॉइस किया वो सही किया है कि नहीं, प्रोडक्ट चलेगा कि नहीं, प्रोडक्ट का एक्सपीरियंस ठीक रहेगा कि नहीं, ये कब फील होता है? Once an individual is going to purchase, he feels that what is going to happen, and that creates a feeling of uncertainty. Now, have you ever thought of कि काय customer असा विचार करतो? This feeling arises because the consumer cannot judge the certainty of consequences of their purchases. The circumstances that lead to such state is lack of information, newness of the product, service offering, complexity of the offering, and high price. मग अशा गोष्टी जर perceived risk होत असेल, so let us try to understand what are the different types of perceived risk. Okay, there are 6 different types of perceived risk which we need to understand. We have an adjustment done. So dear students, let us now try to understand what are the different types of perceived risk. If you look on the slide, there are 6 different types of perceived risk. Let us try to look into one by one and try to understand that with the help of example. The first risk which comes into the picture is called as functional risk. Functional risk म्हणजे काय? This refers to a risk which a consumer perceives when he is uncertain about the product attributes, features and overall benefit. थोडक्यात मी जर मायक्रोवेव्ह परचेस केला तर हा मायक्रोवेव्ह घरी घेऊन गेल्यानंतर व्यवस्थित चालेल का? What is his or her doubt? His or her doubt is whether the product is going to expect or product is going to perform with respect to what is expected with respect to that product or not. That is called as functional risk. So uncertain, here it is uncertain about the product attribute, features and overall benefits. The second risk which we can try to understand is called as physical risk. What is this physical risk? This is a kind of risk and this is perceived when the consumer doubts his and his family's safety with respect to the use of the product. तो काय डाऊट करतो की हा प्रोडक्ट वापरायच्या वेळेस will my family and myself be safe? आता त्याच मायक्रोवेव्ह ओव्हनचं एक्झाम्पल काय होईल फिजिकल रिस्कला की while cooking in a microwave oven which emits microwave oven हे रेडिएशन होत चालतं, मग ते हार्मफुल रेडिएशन जो बाहेर पडेल will it not kill the food nutrients, or will consumption of food that is cooked in microwave oven lead to cancer, or will it lead to shocks and short circuit in times of voltage fluctuation? That is called as physical radiation. त्याच्यातून जेवण बनवून कॅन्सर होऊ शकतो आणि voltage fluctuation मध्ये शॉक बसू शकतो मला. That is what is called as physical risk. Similarly, The financial risk is also a perceived risk. What is this financial risk? This is a kind of risk which is perceived when the consumer doubts as whether the product is worth its cost or not. In other words, the consumer is going to assess the benefit versus cost of the product. मायक्रोवेव्हची किंमत 10,000 रुपये आहे. Is it really worth to purchase it for 10,000 rupees? Is it going to give me benefits worth rupees 10,000? Is it going to serve me 5-10 वर्ष चालेल का? हे सगळ्या कॅल्क्युलेशन जेव्हा तो करतो त्या केसमध्ये परसिव्ड रिस्क जी आहे त्याला आपण फायनान्शियल रिस्क म्हणतो. Similarly, there is one more risk which is called as social risk. सोशल शब्द आला म्हणजेच मी जे काही प्रोडक्ट घेतो ते माझं सोशल ग्रुप मला अप्रूव्ह करेल का? विल बी अप्रूव्ड बाय द सोशल ग्रुप. ज्या सोसायटीमध्ये मी राहतोय त्याच्यामध्ये त्याला अप्रुव्हल आहे का? त्याचं मायक्रोवेव्ह ओव्हन घरी घेऊन आलो, आजी काय म्हणेल? आजी मान्य करेल का? आजी नको म्हणायला, इतके पैसे का घातले त्या मायक्रोवेव्ह ओव्हनला? सगळी कामं करता येतात, लेडीज कामं करतात घरात. व्हॉट इज दॅट एक्झाम्पल? दॅट इज कॉल्ड ॲज अ सोशल रिस्क. What is the psychological risk? Psychological risk काय असते? When मी जर परचेस केलं, when a consumer feels social embarrassment. म्हणजेच काय? Is it घेऊन आलो पण मायक्रोवेव्ह इतका छान दिसायला आहे का? नाहीतर नको घरी घेऊन आला, घरचे म्हणते हे काय घेऊन आला, बॉक्स कसा घेऊन आला? What is that? That is called as a psychological risk. And the last important risk which we need to understand is called as time risk. What is this time risk? The consumer is uncertain and doubts whether his time has been wasted by making a wrong choice, or that he would have to spend time again if the product does not perform as expected. मायक्रोवेव्ह ओव्हन घेतला पण तो व्यवस्थित चालू शकला नाही तर मला त्याचे रिप्लेसमेंट भेटेल का? व्हॉट इज दिस? दिस इज कॉल्ड ॲज परसिव्ड रिस्क. आणि परसिव्ड रिस्क हँडल केला जाऊ शकतो. कसा हँडल केला जाऊ शकतो? तुम्ही इन्फॉर्मेशन गॅदर करा जास्तीत जास्त. स्टॉर लॉयल्टी जिथून तुम्ही परचेस करतात, कायम परचेस करतात त्या दुकानात गेले ना तर परसिव्ड रिस्क ऑटोमॅटिकली कमी होतो. जो ब्रँड तुम्ही ऑलरेडी ट्राय केलाय त्याच्याच एक्सटेन्शन मध्ये तो प्रोडक्ट अवेलेबल आहे, ब्रँड लॉयल्टी तुमच्या आधीपासून आहे, तर डेफिनेटली परसिव्ड रिस्क कमी होतो. म्हणजेच ब्रँड लॉयल्टी, स्टोर लॉयल्टी, इन्फॉर्मेशन, ब्रँड इमेज, स्टोर इमेज, प्राइस, या काही गोष्टी हा परसिव्ड रिस्क कमी करण्यामध्ये आपल्याला महत्वाचं ठरतो. दॅट इज व्हॉट वी नीड टू अंडरस्टँड विथ रिस्पेक्ट टू व्हॉट इज कॉल्ड ॲज परसिव्ड रिस्क. So dear students, I hope you have understood what do you mean by consumer imaginary. Also we have tried to understand perceived imaginary with respect to the price. We tried to cover what are the different types of risk involved. त्याच्यामध्ये आपण 6 different types of risk cover केले जे आपल्या स्क्रीनवर आता आहेत. Functional risk, physical risk, financial risk, social risk, psychological risk and time risk. So we move to the last part, last session, last point of today's, and we will try to understand what is called as an important aspect related to consumer attitude. We will look into what is consumer attitude and how it is relevant to the market. First and foremost important. What is consumer attitude? Attitude म्हणजेच expression. कसले expression? They are expression of inner feeling. And the inner feeling काय रिफ्लेक्ट करतात? Whether a person is favorably or unfavorably predisposed to a product or service offering and for these. म्हणजेच काय? What I'm trying to put into is it is an inner feeling that will reflect whether a person is favorably or unfavorably predisposed to an object. In short, attitude is, in short, I would like to put into is attitude is reflective of a consistent, favorable or unfavorable feeling that a consumer forms as a result of evaluation of an object or product or serving or any component of product mix. That means it is a learned predisposition. What I mean to say, it is a learned predisposition. This is learned predisposition to behave in a consistently favorable or unfavorable way based on feelings and opinion that results from evaluation of knowledge about the subject, which makes us understand that what are the different components. म्हणजे ह्या ज्या फिलिंग्स आपण डेव्हलप करतो ह्या कशाच्या बेसवर आहे हे समजून घेण्यासाठी आपण वी विल ट्राय टू अंडरस्टँड we will try to understand what are the different components of attitude. That is what we will look at. We will try to understand that how an attitude is formed. आणि attitude form करताना ती favorable असो किंवा unfavorable attitude असो, attitude form करताना कोणते component active असतात आणि ते component कसं guide करतात. That is what we need to understand with respect to what is the component of attitude. And at the last we will try to conclude this session with a small important point. What are the different functions of attitude? Let us move a step forward and try to understand that what are the different components of attitude. जे आपण महत्त्वाचं आपल्यासाठी different attitude समजून घेण्यासाठी let us try to understand that. If you look into the slide, the components of attitude can be classified into three types. What are those? The first, which is called as cognitive or knowledge component. आठवतं का तुम्हाला आपण जेव्हा सुरुवातीला केलं होतं हेच कंपोनेंट बघितले होते. व्हॉट इज दॅट कंपोनेंट? कॉग्निटिव्ह कंपोनेंट, अफेक्ट कंपोनेंट आणि बिहेवियर और कॉग्निटिव्ह कंपोनेंट. हे कंपोनेंट आपण आधी सुद्धा कव्हर केले होते. म्हणून मी म्हटलं की ऍटिट्यूडला जास्त वेळ लागणार नाही, पण लेट अस ट्राय टू अंडरस्टँड व्हॉट इज दॅट विथ रिस्पेक्ट टू the component which we need to look into. What is the first component which we need to understand? Cognitive component, affect component, and the third component which we are going to have is called as cognitive component. So, if you look at in terms of consumer learning, the attitude in case of consumer learning, the attitude would express a consumer feeling of like or dislike about a product or service of offering or a marketing mix. So we need to understand is the component, the first component, which is called as the knowledge component. Knowledge component काय करतं? Knowledge component reflects the learning knowledge that a consumer obtains from his own experiences or interaction with other. Attitude form करताना सगळ्यात पहिल्यांदा cognitive component येतं. म्हणजेच काय? That learning which the consumer has done either by his own experiences or by having an interaction with others. That is what is called as the first component, which is called as cognitive component. The second component is called as affect component or a feeling component. मग फिलिंग कंपोनेंट मध्ये काय? फिलिंग कंपोनेंट इज रिफ्लेक्टेड इन द फॉर्म ऑफ इव्हॅल्युएशन. मग ती इव्हॅल्युएशन काय? आयदर फेवरेबल और अनफेवरेबल. मला घ्यायचा किंवा नाही घ्यायचा, किंवा इंटरेस्ट जनरेट होणं किंवा नाही जनरेट होणं. दॅट इज व्हॉट वी नीड टू अंडरस्टँड. अँड द लास्ट कंपोनेंट विच वी नीड टू अंडरस्टँड इज कॉल्ड ॲज अ बिहेवियरल कंपोनेंट, विच इज ऑल्सो कॉल्ड ॲज अ कॉग्निटिव्ह कंपोनेंट. Behavioral component काय दाखवतो? It is reflected in the form of purchase based on evaluation. जर favorable त्याची feeling असेल तर it will land up with the purchase. If it is unfavorable, he will not purchase, he will change the brand or will postpone the purchase, is what we need to understand. Gaining the knowledge, that is knowledge component. Converting the knowledge by evaluating in the form of favorableness and unfavorableness is what we need to understand. And the last behavioral component is an action, whether you are going to purchase or not. Clearly, if it is the resultant feeling is favorable, definitely you are going to make a purchase. And if the resultant feeling is unfavorableness, then you may not be involved in the purchasing. That is what we need to understand. With this, Let us move to the last part of attitude and the session wherein we will look into what are the functions of attitude. There are four different types of functions which are available. Like first is utilitarian functions, second is ego defensive function, third one is value expressive function, and the fourth one is knowledge functions. Utilitarian functions म्हणजे काय? Consumer will form positive attitude towards a product or service because they provide a utility. In other words, what does it mean? In other words, it means that the product or service is going to give a rewarding experience to the benefits they provide. Consumer learn to relate a reward with the use of offering. On the other hand, if they do not offer a rewarding experience, a consumer is going to have negative attitude towards the product. म्हणजेच काय? Utility functions मध्ये consumer काय करतो? It looks at whether the product or service is going to provide utility. So, if you take an example, Complan helps children grow faster and better. काय utility function आहे? Complan घेतल्यानंतर मुलांची growth faster आणि better होते. That is what is the utility. And what is the second example? I say Meswak is an Ayurvedic toothpaste which fights tooth decay for 24 hours per day. Utility काय आहे? Ayurvedic or herbal product giving 24-hour protection against tooth decay is an utilitarian function. That is what we need to understand. Similarly, let us look at the second function. What is that? That is called as ego defensive function. What is ego defensive function? Here, in case of ego defensive functions, consumers will form attitudes as they help defend their ego, self-concept and self-image. For example, if the consumer is high on ethocentrism, म्हणजे तो जर देशाचेच प्रोडक्ट प्रेफर करत असेल तर he is going to have positive attitude towards the products which are manufactured and marketed by the same country. He will speak and promote brands only which are made locally. These attitudes are generally formed to protect the ego, that is called as ego defensive function. Let us try to take that with a very simple example. Is the meaning काय या functions? It supports a person's ego, self-image and self-concept. For example, Rexona deodorant prevents body odor whole day long. Is an example which is of ego defensive function. If you look at value, see the difference now. Here it is formed on the basis of ego, self-image and self-concept. Here the attitudes are formed on the basis of person's values, lifestyles, personality also. This example of this could be Mercedes-Benz, a car for CEO. Dose of 1/4 moisturizing cream. What does it depict? Depicts softness. Raymond, a complete man. Status, style and sophistication. That is what we need to understand. And the fourth function of attitude is called as knowledge function. What does this reflect? In this case, attitudes are formed when consumers want to reaffirm their knowledge base. Such products that structure knowledge and reaffirm it, they provide conformance, certainty and reliability. Odomos mosquito repellent are safe for skin. Johnson & Johnson, any product is absolutely safe for a baby. Proceed is a safe drug. These are few examples which are related for development of knowledge in terms of knowledge function. With this, I complete attitude, wherein we try to understand the composition of attitude and functions of attitude with the help of example. To conclude, dear students, We started with the first point wherein we tried to look into what do you mean by consumer perception. We saw what is the difference between perception and sensation. We looked into what is the nature of perception. Also, we tried to understand what are the four components of a perceptual process: wise input, perceptual mechanism, output, and behavior. Then we move to a second point of consumer imagery. We try to understand this with an example of perceived imagery of a consumer with respect to price. Also, while we were studying perceived imagery or consumer imagery, we came across the term called as perceived risk. Concluded that with understanding six types of different risks involved, like functional risks, physical risk, financial risk, social risk, psychological risk, and time risk. At the last, we covered what is consumer attitude, what is the composition of consumer attitude, and what are the functions of attitude. Dear students, thank you.